Hello, everybody. Welcome to another continuing conversation. If you were with us last week, wow, we know that the Utopia Planitia book dropped about 3 to 4 weeks ago at this time. And last week we had all the writers come on board to kind of give an overview of this book, which I'm risking to say might be one of the most popular books that Star Trek Adventures has pumped out so far, with the cross with STO. Well, today we're continuing the conversation. I'm Michael Dismuke with Continuing Missions, which is the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures RPG, in addition to being a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures. And today we have with us, again, a cast of writers about certain chapters we're going to be focusing on today in Star Trek for the Utopia Planitia book. But let me first introduce, of course, Jim Johnson, and then you'll go ahead and make sure to pass the baton to everybody else, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, will do. Hi, everybody. Jim Johnson. I am the Star Trek Adventures project manager and line editor for Menivius Entertainment. I'm partly responsible for bringing this group of people together to write on this book. So I am very excited to talk about this at further length, because this is a big book for us. I have had a lot of fun, a lot of work. Boy, a lot of work went into this one. And without further ado, I want to introduce my fellow panelists, and I'll start alphabetically. First name with Aaron.
I'm Aaron Pollyea. I'm the science, technology, and starships guy. So yeah, I did a lot of work on the book, I guess.
Sure did. All right, over to Al. Introduce yourself.
How's it going? Al Spader, freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures. And had a lot of fun coming up with stuff and bringing a lot of information together into one place in this book.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. And John.
Hey, everybody. I'm the one that likes to write about the history of a fictional universe, and I have a blast doing it. So it's great to be here.
Very cool. All right. So we are going to be talking about Utopia Planitia tonight. We're going to do a deeper dive into the book than what we did last time. And because this book is so big, it's 256 glorious pages of Starfleet stuff, starships, spaceships, space stations, just everything you can imagine. We're going to chunk it up a bit. So because chapter 4 is a very, very meaty chapter full of space frames, we're going to save that for another episode. So today, tonight, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is for you, we're going to talk about chapters 1, 2, 3, and 5. So we're going to cover everything in the book except for chapter 4. And I'll be kind of taking the lead here, although my group here will certainly chime in with commentary. And I think it probably makes sense just to start right in. Now, I think last time we talked about kind of like general high-level overviews, reactions to getting involved in the book, what were you excited about, et cetera. So we're going to not rehash that because we've already done it. Go watch that episode again if you want to hear more about that. So let's just jump right on in. Thomas is not here tonight, so we won't talk any further about the forward. I think he pretty well covered that last time. So we'll just jump. We're going to skip the introduction because who cares about the introduction? I wrote it. Nobody cares. It's just, it gets you warmed up and excited about the book. Hopefully, I had fun putting together the essential viewing sidebar because it's always fun to have a list of episodes to go reference, especially for those of you who may not be that familiar with Star Trek or the game. This is just a good way to give you a short list of approximately 20 episodes to go binge and watch. They're all good. They're all fun. So go check it out. Plus a couple of movies. Dropped a few movies in there. Anyway, so let's just jump right into chapter 1. This is primarily, if I remember right, it was John's chapter, using a couple notes from Aaron initially, but mostly taking it upon yourself to go crazy with it and have fun. A lot of great history here. I've heard some great comments from fans saying they were impressed that you were able to compress 300 years of Starfleet history into about 10 pages. So expound upon that. How did you do it? What was your approach? What did you like? What did you hate? Tell us about it, John.
I think the first thing I want to go with is to say, 300 years of Starfleet history, 10 pages. I think Aaron and we did a great job, but it's kind of one of those things too, where it's like so much hit the cutting room floor. Because one, when you're really passionate about it, you just kind of want to just keep going. And there's always that part when you're a writer, when you realize that it's like, man, I just wrote like 700 words and I'm talking about like Andorian fleet movements. And I'm like, and this will appeal to like 3 people. One of them's me. And just the moment when you have to be like, okay, we'll just dial it back. And really, it's just Aaron who handled. You handled like the first like 2 or 3 pages of this section. Am I right, Aaron?
Maybe not that much, but like the first bit, like this humble beginnings and the first part about USPA, there was part of my original pitch to Jim back in like 2019 for this book. I had already written that whole chunk out, and I really wanted to focus in on showing what the difference was between our world and the timeline of Star Trek, like how it started changing. How did we get to Khan in the 1990s? How did we get to this spacefaring civilization even before World War III? Because there were interplanetary spacecraft even before World War III in the Star Trek timeline, because Khan's on one of them, a DY-100. So I wanted to talk about some of the differences that popped up. Yeah, it still looks like our timeline quite a bit, but you have a bit more of cooperation between the US and the Soviets in the space race. The Soviet Union doesn't fall apart. We learned that in Next Gen, just from specific starships dedication plaques. So
2 things. I just want to clarify and ask you to expound on this. For those who are listening and don't know what it is, USPA is United Earth Space Probe Agency. So this is kind of like the NASA of the Star Trek timeline, I would say. Is that right?
It's sort of. Yeah. It's complicated because you have NASA that's in the 1960s. You have the European Space Agency. You have Roscosmos, which is the Soviet one. But they all kind of come together into an international one before World War III. And then after World War III, USPA starts up to try to get in contact with space probes that were lost during World War III or missions that were lost contact with during World War III.
I want to say what I liked about this. And again, for people who are game masters who are going to be using this, we love those going back in time adventures. And for new players and new game masters to Star Trek, it could be confusing because it is a divergent timeline from the 60s. I almost think like For All Mankind, the TV show For All Mankind on Apple Plus,
love that
better
show.
Represents what the breakoff was in order to become the Star Trek universe, right? And so you could take a paragraph from this and go back in time to one of these paragraphs in your Star Trek show. And I was like, I was already imagining stuff based off this write-up. So very helpful information right there, I thought.
So I wrote the little high in the sky quote because I wanted to show that all of humanity wasn't just torn apart by warfare, that there were humans out there trying to like stop or, to cry out for peace. And then everything else, that's John.
And that's still a really important message, I think, just from the intro chapter. I mean, because I think some of the things that we tend to forget is that Star Trek really has a lot of optimism to it. And pretty much the beginning of this chapter is right after humanity's darkest period. And it gets a little bit brighter. And then there's the threat that, not to use a cliche, but humanity's dreams are almost ended before like they have a chance to come to fruition with like the Romulan War and forming the coalition of planets. And it's just trying to get all that to the reader in a way to just give them all these ideas. Because I think the last thing we wanted to do was to write a chapter and that was just like a history test, because that could be fun but for most people it's sort of like, all right, when was the Federation founded? When was Archer's world discovered? And so from a lot of players, they'll just glance at that and they'll move on. And the trick here was trying to figure out a way to take all that history, compress it, and nail all the high notes so that everybody loved it. And obviously the editors did a great job with helping us with that. But yeah, like I said, as a fan, because I'm a huge Trek fan, thanks to my mom, it's just been so great being able to look into the history of it. And I'm a historian. I actually work for a historical society. And so being able to set aside my real world research tools and then going through my Encyclopedia of Trek, going through, Memory Alpha, going through the previously written Star Trek Adventures books, and just being able to look at it from that kind of mindset and figuring out what hopefully the fans really enjoyed. And that covered a lot of material pretty quickly. I mean, we're talking about early Tellarites and Vulcans. We're talking about the wars between their civilizations. We're talking about going from, the kind of like the militant galaxy that we see in Enterprise, and then going into the galactic Cold War that is the 23rd century. And then the more optimistic, more hopeful galaxy of the 24th century. And yeah, it was a blast to write.
Real quick, did any? If we do, let's go around on this chapter. If everyone had a favorite piece or something that stood out that you would want people to know going through this, we can go around through all of us. But John, what's one thing maybe you'd say? Hey, pay attention to this paragraph or this box.
I really love doing the little captain's logs or the log entries on the side. They're just a lot of fun to do, and covering the airing of grievances before the Klingon High Council from when the Grissom was destroyed. And I did that a lot for the Klingon players who, because this was a mainly Starfleet focused chapter, but being able to touch upon, the events of Star Trek 3 and the explanation afterwards, because the Grissom gets destroyed. And then hearing how the Klingons dealt with that from a very brutal political-esque nature. But also it was just so much fun talking about the different types of navies. I mean, the Andorians, the Tellarites, the Vulcans. Those were my favorite sections.
Yeah, your one on the Grissom made me want to go back and do a 12-episode RPG leading up to the Grissom's destruction. Let's play the crew. What were they doing before they got blown up? I think that'd be kind of funny. Anybody else? Aaron, Al, Jim, anything that when you got this chapter, you're oh, that was good. Any to highlight to you?
Go ahead, Al. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say just a little bits in there about the Romulan War and some pieces about the Romulans manipulating other species to do their bidding and stuff like that. It really kind of laid this foundation of this secret society that is manipulating people to do their bidding. And I thought that was really cool, that idea.
That was so hard to do because... So in all the years of Star Trek's been on the air, there's some conflicting things. When we first encounter the Romulans, they use atomic weapons and subspace radio to communicate, and you never see them, which is a really cool thing for what you think is going to be a limited run sci-fi series. But when you're talking about a grand war, and it's wait, so there were no boarding actions? The Klingons never hopped on a Romulan cruiser and said, hey, you look like Vulcans. And so figuring out a way to make it more believable without doing hand-wavy magic. It was really challenging, but I think people will enjoy it.
What about you, Jim? I saw you had something.
I was going to wait for Aaron to add anything, and then I'll expound a little bit.
Yeah, no, I really liked the piece of art on page 16. For whatever reason, that just gave me joy seeing that, because I love Daedalus class starships, and I love seeing racks of missiles unloading from them.
Are those missiles or escape pods?
To me, they look like missiles because they're firing out of all of those ships, and only one's actually being struck by a weapon.
Yeah,
I thought those were escape pods.
I think those are atomic missiles.
Either way, that would be cool if they were atomic. Yes, I was looking at my own chapter on my iPad. Cool,
it's a dynamic picture. It's at an angle, so it looks like it's in motion. There's light, there's ambient light, and then there's the light from the weapons. I thought it was a really cool picture. Now that being said, obviously war and fighting isn't all what Star Trek is at all. It's just 5%. But I just thought that was a really dynamic, interesting picture.
I agree. One of my favorite ships too. Jim knows. All of you in the future will know why it's my favorite.
Very nice. So I wanted to just note that this isn't really an Easter egg; it's just an observation. For those who've been following the game from the beginning, you'll know that starting in the core book and then working our way through all the different supplements, we've been gradually moving the timeline forward. Book after book after book, with the exception of the Discovery campaign guide and the tricorder set, right? We've been gradually adding more eras of play and stuff onto it. And this really kind of brings it up to Star Trek Online and Picard, right? I mean, obviously we started developing the game even before Picard came out. We didn't even know Picard was a thing, I think, in 2017. I think we found out maybe a little bit later. But this brings the game timeline up to 2410, although we're able to go back and forth, into the prehistory as well. And so, like, if you were to read the books, like, kind of in order of release from the core book through the quadrant books and then into the other supplements and then to here, you'll see like we stitch all of that stuff together. Not necessarily always perfectly, but like there's stepping stones throughout all the different books. And so if you take this book and you combine it with like the history sections in the player guide or the game master guide, or the history sections in the discovery campaign guide, or in some of the other books, like what you have is a tapestry of just great Star Trek history. And there's so many plot hooks here. Like you were talking earlier about how you could use a paragraph from this book and do a time travel episode, right? Well, you could just as easily take any paragraphs out of this book and run a whole campaign just on that, right? You could do early Enterprise era, you could do Discovery era, Strange New Worlds, the original series, so forth, so on and so forth. Just because there's so much content here. In fact, you could probably even do, and I'd love to hear somebody do this, right? Just given the amount of tools that you have at your disposal, I would love somebody to do like a USPA campaign before the NX, before Enterprise, like just after, you know, the Phoenix takes flight, and like that whole, like, it's not even early Starfleet, right? It's like getting on a warp delta and seeing what you can do, right? Before Archer creates the warp 5 engine and goes forward, like that'd be a really interesting campaign right there.
Could some humans during the USPA era have gone to Vulcan?
Yeah.
Probably.
Ooh. Yeah. So they could have been maybe serving or consulting on a Vulcan ship and been involved in Vulcan adventures?
Maybe. Yeah. And you could kind of set the Vulcans up as the antagonists, right? Because they were kind of like holding humanity back, you know, putting us on a short leash, you know, and there could be a lot of political inter stuff going on, and I mean, there's just a right pile of story there that could be played with.
Well, as anyone who knows my story too, excuse me, I just wanted to keep on that line. Whereas Al, you pointed out the Romulan stuff, I pointed out the box on page 12 about guided advancement with the Vulcans. And I personally, anyone who plays in my game or knows me knows I don't like Vulcans. I don't trust Vulcans. I prefer Romulans over Vulcans. So I was like, ooh, this was a perfect seed, that box, because some humans, and I think rightfully so, to your point, Jim, were like, the Vulcans are holding us back.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I think that alone, exploring that back in time, that would be an amazing throwback campaign.
Well, here's the thought about that era. We know that that Zephram Cochrane retires to the Proxima Centauri colony. There's a colony already set up on Proxima even before NX launches. And that means there was a whole bunch of USPA and boomer ships going between Earth and Proxima Centauri to set up the colony. And again, spoilers, one of the things that got cut from chapter 4 was the first proper USPA starship that would have gone out and done exploration of the nearby star systems at low warp speeds, but still.
Will we see that on continuing missions?
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah,
but it's not canon. It's not canon. So I mean, that's why it got cut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it makes sense that you could easily set up a campaign there.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's about like that era is also about when, like, it's not just that humanity discovers the universe, it's the universe discovers humanity. And we see how it leads to the Romulan War, which is like, you know, where the Romulans decide, no, we've got to nip this in the bud. But, you know, just learning about how like the first encounters with the Andorians, where they get it from the Vulcan perspective, you know, where you know, Michael's just like, I don't trust the Vulcans at all. And when we first see the Andorians, they're like, hey, we're being spied upon. And the Vulcans are like, we're not spying on you. And then that's when we learn Vulcans lie. And it's such a really good era. And I've always loved Enterprise. I think Enterprise gets like really maligned by some fans. But I love just how we get to see humanity growing and all the new technology, like when we first see a replicator for the first time in Enterprise. And it's really such a rich era to explore.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then, so this is a ham-handed segue, but I'm going to take it since you threw it out there. Speaking of technology, I want to just kind of, it's not really an Easter egg because it's very clearly in the book, but I don't want readers, don't sleep on pages 21 and 22. So we wrap up this chapter with a little bit of a look ahead toward the 25th century. So like we're coming out of the 24th century. We're coming out of the stuff that we know really well, you know, Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, Lower Decks, Picard. And we're kind of heading into this new uncharted canonically period of time where we don't really know what happens in the 25th century. Now, certainly Star Trek Online has done a lot with the early 25th century, but like the 25th century into the 27th century, and then even out to the 32nd century is just kind of a gap because the producers just haven't gotten to it yet. We have a sense of what happens in the 32nd century, of course, because we have 2 seasons of Discovery with a third on the way to kind of talk about. We see the technology there, and we see the technology where we are. And so now we're starting to kind of like look ahead, what's possible, what's coming. And I think you did a great job of adding some technology in here, kind of like suggesting what's to come. It hints at some of the stuff that's in Star Trek Online, and then just other things that are possible. And so I want to just encourage readers, like if you want to take your Star Trek games into a place that is really, truly uncharted, where nobody's gone before, take advantage of some of this new technology and come up with some mechanics with your group and then do cool shit with it, or cool stuff with it, excuse me. But Aaron, John, Al, Michael, any thoughts on some of this technology? Anything here that called out to you as something that was worth exploring further? Anything that you wished you had gotten more information on?
I think for me, it was really just remembering what my ships had in Star Trek Online. But no, it's just in Voyager, we see how Starfleet radically evolves after the Dominion War, and a blade of armor, transphasic torpedoes, the slipstream and transwarp drives. I think it's really cool to see how this technology continues to grow. And even in the show, we go all the way into the far, far future. And that's why I had to put in that sidebar where I didn't want the players to feel like that all their problems would get solved by miracle technology, and that eventually, kind of like how the old show changed, and we went from little colored gemstones on a console that they just pushed, and then they said, "Oh no, the shields are going down," and then we get all the way to essentially a bridge full of touch screens and iPads. I think it's just important for players and game masters to realize that technology in Star Trek is always going to be whatever serves the story.
Yeah.
I think to that point too, I know we've used on our game, the one I play with Al and Aaron and a couple other people, the integrated holographic emitters. We kind of were a test bed for that. And what we explored was the problems it causes along with the good things. So some people may say, oh, I want to load up my ship with all this, but you can have an entire couple episodes just based off the problems that this technology, in our case, the holographic emitters were taken over, and they had multiple insurgents who are holographic insurgents taking the crew hostage.
That's so cool.
And so the commanding officer, the first officer, made the decision to strip the whole ship of it, except in a couple key areas, because they're like, this is too easy to be used against us. So looking at a paragraph like that can create an entire adventure in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the great, I don't know, I guess it's a trope a little bit of not just science fiction, but Star Trek is like, give the characters some cool tools and then immediately have something go wrong with it, right? I mean, Voyager did it early on when they had the bioneural gel packs catch a cold, right? And then there was something wrong. There's a whole episode right there. Like you could string that along for several episodes. So yeah, take advantage of that. Have fun with it. Cool. All right. So that's chapter 1. Again, I felt it was necessary to have this in here to kind of like set the stage. Like, here's Starfleet. Here's where we are. Continuing the timeline of the game. And then also just providing just a ton of great plot hooks, story ideas, technology. Like in 10 pages, like how did we manage to do that? I don't know, but congratulations, because you made it work. My job as an editor was relatively easy. Although again, like I always feel the pain when I have to cut something to make it fit, because in an ideal world we wouldn't have to do that. But you know what? Also, we can't release Word documents as a product as much as I'd like to. We got to have the look and feel going on in here. So, all right. So let's jump into chapter 2 then, Life in Starfleet. So we spent a lot of time, chapter 1, talking about the historical perspective, getting the readers grounded into Starfleet. Where has Starfleet been? Where is it now? Where's it going? And of course, where is it now is entirely dependent on where you set your game, right? Those 10, 12 pages of history, you can set your campaign anywhere in there, or ahead of it or behind it or whatever. Or you could, time jump all over the place, like whatever your campaign is. Presuming that you're running a Starfleet campaign, Starfleet, as a whole doesn't really change, right? We've seen it throughout all the series. Starfleet is pretty much Starfleet from early Enterprise all the way out to 32nd Century Discovery. Like the core components of it don't change. And so we thought, well, here's an opportunity to kind of expand further on the content that we gave you in the player guide and in some of the other products, and say, okay, let's dig deeper into what is it to be in Starfleet, right? What does it mean? And we extrapolated a lot of this. I'm certainly going to let the writers talk here in just a moment, but there's a lot that you can infer from just watching the episodes and the TV shows and everything else, and just like pulling on the same history that the writers do. Right? We know it's clearly based on modern Navy, and we know that it's based on modern military services to some extent, and we can pull a lot of that content in and shape it and mold it. So now, and I will, we hearkened on this earlier when we were talking about how we don't always remember who wrote which section. So I'll be honest, this was such it was a fun project to work on, but it was admittedly very much a pastiche. Like everybody was writing different sections and different subsections and different pieces. And then, my job as editor was to take all that stuff together and kind of like figure out thematically what fits here, what fits there, how does it all make sense, and then try to make some sort of flow to it. I'm not confident that it flows. I have not reread this recently, other than in bits and pieces, jumping around. So it may not hang together very well, but I certainly think it does. But we'll leave it to the readers to decide. Now it's in your hands now, folks. It's out of our hands. It's in your hands. It's your book now. So open question for the group, because honestly, I don't remember specifically what section. I think I know Michael's style well enough to pick him up a little bit here and there. And Al, you certainly got a good style. John and Al, you're both very good at kind of like being a style neutral. I don't know what the right phrase of that is, but and I'm not saying you don't have a distinctive style, because you're both very, very good writers. But it's harder for me to look at your stuff and say, oh yeah, Al wrote this, or to say, oh yeah, John wrote this. It's just because it's good, solid, clean writing, and it's almost one voiced already. Whereas Michael and Aaron have very specific patterns to their writing and very specific styles. And I can glance at something and say, "Oh, yep, Aaron wrote that."
Now I'm dying to hear. Now, of course, I'm dying to hear what this is.
Well, I think that'll remain in the purview of the editors, and I won't spend time going into that detail. But rest assured, I love everything that you all do, because I keep coming back to you to write more. So that's, if nothing else, that should be confirmation that you're doing all right. So no worries. But I'll stop talking now. I want you all to talk about chapter 2. Tell me what did you love about it? What did you find challenging? What did you find interesting? What are some of your highlights that either you personally worked on and or had an opportunity to work on, or things that are in the chapter that you thought, oh wow, that's really cool, and I forgot about that, and I'm glad that it's in the book. So I don't care what order we go in, figure it out.
So I'll start it up, Jim. This section started becoming one of those things where, all right, I want to write one specific thing about a duty roster. And I started doing the duty roster, and then all of a sudden there was other things that started popping in my mind. Well, if we're asking or suggesting that players should know what their character is doing at any point during the day, we should give them other locations and whatnot within the ship, and how to use those as part of their daily routines. I think some of the most interesting episodes of Star Trek happen when characters aren't at work, right? And they either pulled in or something weird happens to them and things like that. So that's why this kind of starts off talking about a bunch of questions to ask about your character, and how would your duty roster look like, or like your daily schedule. Like, what's your routine? What time do you wake up? What shift are you working? What do you do on your, what time do you get lunch? That type of stuff. We thought that would help you both envision your character on board the ship, and also help make a connection to the ship, and give you some additional ideas for story and plot hooks that happen when you are not at work, which was a very fun area to write. And it spilled into, well, we need to talk about the bridge. We need to talk about the computers. Like we need, like it all just started snowballing. And
it was the day in the life of it. It was all, okay, when you're not firing photon torpedoes or being attacked by Klingon raiders, what are you doing? I collaborated with Aaron on the part on computers. And I remember I used to listen to Star Trek and I would hear terms like algorithm, subroutine, cascade failure, LCARS. I'm like, what's the difference between all that? So I said, let's go ahead. And if someone's picking up this book for the first time, let's define these words that you're going to hear almost dropped every single episode so that they can kind of know the technobabble if they want to use it. And also all these things like manual overrides, security overrides. We said, wow, the original book, I went installing a subroutine. We hear that almost every episode. But there's no game mechanics for that. It was written. I said, wow, this is so common. It has to happen. And then I went over to Aaron. I'll let him talk about it. I was like, and then computers evolved over time. And I said, I'm not fit to write this. I knew Aaron probably has it like memorized. So I gave it over to him. And Aaron, what did you do with that?
Well, yeah, I did the sidebar, at least in the computer section of computer technologies by era. And I know I had done a big chunk about computers in the Discovery campaign book, mainly because I've tried to put together in my head, at least, all the stuff we've known about computers in the Star Trek universe from all the series. And I've kind of theorized about how exactly all these things work and what the terminologies are. So trying to summarize all of the junk that's in my head into this little sidebar was fun, trying to go, okay, well, here's semiconductor computers like we have today, microchips and all that. And why Duotronics came about, what's the big deal about Duotronics and why was it all chunky looking like it was in the original series compared to the sleek flat screens that we have today in iPhones? Why is it chunky? Well, there's reasons for it. And then what's the difference between Duotronics and isolinear systems? And why do we have bioneural gel packs? Or why is a positronic brain a thing when, a positron's actually a piece of antimatter? Well, it obviously references back to Isaac Asimov and
obviously.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I don't know if you haven't read Isaac Asimov's robot series, then, well, okay, it comes from that. It's a term from that. But I tried to give a reason why that might be called positronic in there. Anyway, I went on for a while in that sidebar, and that was a lot of fun.
I learned a lot from it, which helps. I think I want to call out before we move through this section too, because I don't know who wrote these sections, some of them, but one thing I appreciate about this, Jim, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it really took common terms and broke it down. I don't know who wrote the one on heading. I think that was Al yeah. So maybe can we talk about that? Because you oftentimes, why did you write it? Let me just ask that question.
Well, my main character is a con officer, and I happen to have my Next Generation technical manual out. And one day I was listening to, I don't remember what Star Trek show I was watching, but I heard them announce the heading, and I'm like, how does that work? And I happened to have had my technical manual in my lap, and I was flipping through, and there was this awesome picture and a good description on what it all meant. So I said, well, if I don't know what those numbers mean, it's possible that other people don't know what those numbers mean. Mm-hmm. So we decided to get it in there for con officers to use the language and to explain, their positioning and, their heading and whatnot.
Yeah, this is Utopia Planitia, so we got to know everything about the ship, right? And what it means. I thought that was beautiful. That inspired, there's a lot of controversy I've heard over the years too. So I was happy it got in the book. There were two different things. One was, why do my maps not match? And so people who are new to Star Trek, you're going to hear a lot of guff about these different maps that get produced over the years. And I had such succinct pleasure trying to make sense as to why it doesn't make sense. I don't know if it was, Aaron, I that's Aaron or John, if you all read it, or Al or Jim, if people could digest that and it was a pretty good sell. I was curious.
I thought it was good. I didn't work on this chapter, and I loved all of it because it reminded me, and I'm saying this in a very positive way, of the old Star Trek magazine from the late 90s. And I just loved going from each section. And I know it might seem weird when it's we're talking about bridge duties, and this is a duty roster, and this is maps. And I'm absorbing all the info. And I'm this is good. This is good. This is good. So I thought it made perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. And that was the same thing between moving at the speed of plot, because I said, okay, well, let's make it technical for the people who want it technical and make an extended task or an extended consequences, which I think, Al, you invented extended consequence. Oh, no, was that Nathan Dowdell?
Nathan
Dowdell created extended consequences. So that got wrote in here. So again, plot's more important than being exact, which was the point of it. But we need to give people some arguing points online when they're trying to defend their stance. I was like, let's give them some points to argue.
Along with the heading thing, some really common stuff to remember. And I don't know if it got into the book. I was looking around for it. That, you hear the terms port and starboard. There's a really easy way of remembering all of it. Port is on the left because port and left have 4 letters each. And the red blinky light goes on the left because it also has the fewest number of letters. So starboard, right, green.
Oh,
yeah, that's how I learned it.
if that makes a difference.
Yeah.
Why did we not? Did we have a chapter on that? We should have. Did you?
It's just that's what the blinky lights are for. That's navigational lights.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Jim, I do want to throw in one little thing here, because when we write this stuff, we don't know what the art's going to look like. Every now and then we get to write an art brief of something that we'd like to see. So when I opened up this chapter and we were talking about the bridge, and I saw all these bridge diagrams, I lost my mind.
Yeah,
I thought it was so cool because it was unexpected, and it was really, really cool.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm glad that I'm still able to surprise you, even though you worked on the book with me for months, right? But I mean, that's just part of the weird magic of doing RPG books like this. Is you work on the manuscript for so long in Word or whatever program you're doing, and then once it's all done, you hand it off to the layout artists and the graphic designers, and they take it into InDesign or whatever program they're using. And that's when they add the layout, they add the graphics, they add the planted images, they add all this other stuff. And then 6 weeks or however long it takes them to lay it out, I get the first draft of the layout, and I'm I get really super excited because it's like a whole new book, right? It's like I've been staring at the manuscript for months, and I'm sick to death of looking at Microsoft Word documents now. But now I get to see something completely different. It's like, whoa, my whole world goes crazy. I'm glad you like the bridges. I always intended from the very beginning of developing the outline for this book that I wanted to get some sort of schematics into the book. I didn't know what they were going to look like exactly, because I knew that we would have to go find some artists, and we managed to find an artist to provide some renders of some key ones. I wanted to do more renders, but we just didn't have the space for it. And then in talking to Lee, who did the layout on this book, I was like, well, what's the middle ground that we can do here? And he was like, well, how about we do the 3 renders that we commissioned, and then I do deck plans of as many bridges as I can stuff into here. And I was like, yeah, go for it. Give it a try. So hopefully we'll get Lee on here sometime, Michael, to talk about the graphic design of this book. Absolutely. I wanted to pack as many in here as I could. We managed to get 8 in here? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on these 2 pages. And then he managed to sneak in I think the Oberth shows up later in the book. Either the Oberth or the Reliant. No, Miranda's in here. So it might have been the Oberth that he snuck in later. So in totality, we got a whole bunch in here. So I was really glad we could do that, because I know the bridges really matter to fans, but also to gamers. And that was the point I wanted to make about the whole chapter kind of as a whole. I know we'll talk about more of it here in a second, but as role players and gamers and game masters, we need a certain depth of knowledge about the setting and how things work, right? And to like I said, that you don't always get to see on the show. Like on the different TV shows and the episodes, they'll kind of infer things about how things work, or maybe they'll drop in a nugget of oh, that's how it works, and then you just add that to your storehouse of knowledge about how Starfleet works and how life on a ship works. But for me personally, when I'm role playing a character, this is the kind of depth of detail that I want. I may not use 90% of it in my game, but my character knows all this stuff, right? And if my character knows all this stuff, then that's what's important, because that's what I can hang stories on, or it helps my performance, as it were, of my character, right? Because all this lore about Starfleet matters to them. It may not matter to me as much, but just all this knowledge and all this detail that we've been able to add into the books really should be able to help you with your role playing. But then for game masters, it should be able to help you come up with plot hooks and plot ideas too, because this is everything in here is a thread that you can pull to make things go wrong, or to create drama, or to create conflict or something.
For me, as a forever game master, sometimes I get it, but pretty much another thing I was thinking about is as we were playing Star Trek Adventures over the years is things that would come up that sometimes would defy my plot. And I said I have to write in game. I have to give the game masters tools they can use to have sensical explanations why things can or cannot happen. So like on do we take the shuttle or transporter on page 39, I need to give game masters a list of plausible reasons why they may have to take a shuttle or they may have to take a transporter, because sometimes that can really ruin a plot. If people are just transporting in and you needed them to crash land, for instance, to drive the plot. So those are some of the, and I know that I think Al or Aaron did planetary landings and stuff. That was me. Yeah. Okay. For the same reason.
Yeah, for the same reason. Well, it's one of those perennial questions. Can my starship land on a planet? And it was always like, to me, the answer was always sure. If it works for your game, do it. Because in the end, every starship that we've seen has ample thrust to be able to do whatever the heck it wants to do in a planetary atmosphere. So why not? And then they would say, well, wouldn't it just kind of lean or do whatever? Well, that's what thrusters are for. And anti-grav is, there's gravity manipulation on Starfleet vessels, even back into the 22nd century. It's fine, but if you really want to put down rules for it, if it has, I put down my rules that here's the general gist of what you should kind of consider if your ship really is designed to land on a planetary surface or not.
Yep. All right. So, Al, I want to ask you, I think you wrote the bulk of this piece of it, but I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the section on downtime on a ship and some of the tables that you dropped in here about story starters and the random tables that you dropped in. It's always fun to have a random table or two just to make things interesting, especially when role playing. So just any thoughts on that little bit? I'm pretty confident you wrote it, so correct me if I'm wrong. But
I do love my random tables quite a bit, and it was fun doing some research to find some pretty obscure games and whatnot. But I think that a story where you're trying to save a cosmozoan from space hunters is every bit as intriguing as two characters discussing, what happened during a war, or characters processing their feelings about, their parents, things like that. So that's kind of where I was going with the idea of downtime on the ship. You can have plenty of stories happen when you're not on the bridge, when you're not in engineering. And a lot of these activities are your moments that drive character development, because your characters, when they are doing action sequences and giving commands and things like that, that's when you're doing your job. And yeah, you can spice it up a little bit with, a catchphrase or something like that along the way. But the really intriguing character development happens when you are processing or interacting with other individuals on the ship. So I wanted to provide an arena for people to use to tell some of these stories in a way that maybe you don't necessarily think about all the time. But there's no question that the trope of the video game that sucks you in is a sci-fi trope that we've seen on Star Trek multiple times. The trope of going to the sparring gym to release your anger happens all the time. And if you use those to develop a character or multiple characters that might be having a conflict, that would be really interesting for your story. I mentioned today on Twitter that, it was really inspiring. I was thinking about actually an episode of Battlestar Galactica where there's a boxing match between two friends. And some people might recognize that reference, but it really showed how much these two friends missed each other, but also how angry they were with each other for becoming separated. I think that the power of those stories are really important to get into a game.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff. No, really great insights. Really appreciate it. So moving on then, let's wrap up the chapter here. Michael, I'm pretty confident you wrote the last two pieces of it. the resource collection, and then the salvage and retrieval operations. Talk a little bit about what got you to write those bits, and what do you think? What value do they bring to not just Utopia Planitia, but to your games in general?
Yeah, anybody who knows me knows Voyager is my favorite Star Trek series. And we've talked about that ad nauseum. In the Game Master's Guide and in the Player's Guide, I had the opportunity to write the chapters about those far from home campaigns and some of the issues that people would deal with that. And so I was so happy when you asked me to do this section, because I was like, oh, I can totally expound on what are the problems deep space missions could actually have. I could expound all day about this because I had so much fun dealing with what kind of resources. I had to do a lot of research in the Star Trek manual, Memory Alpha online, to determine which kind of chemicals and resources and minerals are likely not easily replicable. And so why you might have to need mining operations for that. And then I always have this conversation with Aaron. Aaron's the one who educated me about it, was deuterium. It's one of the most abundant things in the universe. So I had to really think like, okay, well, they're always needing deuterium. Almost like every third episode, they're looking for deuterium. So I was like, I have to come up with some plausible excuses as to what circumstances might lead to you needing deuterium.
Yeah, it's just heavy hydrogen. That's all it is. I mean, it's not the most common thing in the universe, but hydrogen is, and you can make deuterium with particle accelerators. I mean,
I think it was more they needed it to generate the power to replicate things. So without the power, they couldn't replicate more deuterium.
You have one of the things. See, this is where it gets into technology. Like you use your Bassard collectors to actually sweep up hydrogen while you're traveling at warp, and the energy the Bassards like energize it all, and then it's going to collect in the Bassards, and you're already sweeping up deuterium with that. So that helps power your fusion reactors.
See, so I had to write based off of this in my 5 years of is it 5 years, maybe 3 years of conversation with Aaron about it. I said, for example, there could be a massive leak in the deuterium storage tanks, or the warp nacelles and ram scoops are severely damaged. So I had to give the GM reasons why they may need some of these, what might be common. And so I just really wanted people to, again, get into the mind spaces. Hey, you know what? You can have adventures purely because you don't have resources. And this could drive you even into negotiating with other species for things you need. I think, honestly, that it's good for your players to sometimes be a little freaked out that they're in outer space. Mm-hmm. I mean, they should sometimes be worried about air and life support systems and food. I think you can't have it all cushy. Like, we never really saw the Enterprise in that situation. We never saw that situation, especially TNG. They were plush living. And I just think you can't really be boldly going to the edges and just be cushy all the time. So I think there had to be some really good detail in here, Jim, about resource collection and how to drive a plot along that.
Mm-hmm. Kevin Smith called the Enterprise D the shopping mall in space.
Exactly.
Because it had carpeted floors and lights everywhere.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this chapter is a good example, not just the resource collection, but maybe more so resource collection is a good example of taking that subchapter and combining it with the notes about running a deep space game or a far from home game. Where your ship is like literally pulled, like you just take them completely away from the Alpha Beta Quadrant, away from any starbase, any well-known resources. They're on their own. They're literally on their own. They've got to figure it out. And, maybe they'll get lucky like Voyager got and have, constant adventures every week where they encounter a new, Class M planet with a spacefaring civilization where they could probably stock up on the necessary materials they need. But if they're really, truly like, Gilligan's Island, like out there on their own, no chance of anybody coming to help them, then they've got to, it's like the old, this may be a bad example of the 18th century Navy where they had to go kind of fend for themselves to find lumber and resources and water and food and stuff if they were stuck out in the middle of nowhere. But if you're really truly trailblazing, then you need to be able to gather resources on your own and synthesize it and process it and make it usable for you. So I thought this chapter would really tie into that. And to a lesser extent, salvage and retrieval too. Michael, talk a little bit about this chapter.
That was a lot based off of my love for Starfleet Corps of Engineers book series. I really love Starfleet Corps of Engineers. And by the way, thank you. I don't know who did it, Jim, but on page 47, like Al's reaction to the art on his the fact that on page 47, you have these 3 art pieces where you're zooming in, scanning a planet for mining resources. I was like, oh, that's just beautiful. That made me really, really happy. But again, this was all plot seeds and extended tasks having to do with when you come across derelicts. And just basically, these could all be B stories that would open up a captain's log, like, hey, we're currently in the Zardoni system, retrieving a Klingon bird of prey that's about to drop into the atmosphere of a pre-warp civilization, and give them like a B plot, but then go ahead and throw a module on top of that. I just wanted opportunities for them to see what it's like to work in space. And that's why the salvage and retrieval, idea came up with that. And then there's a bunch of encounters. One of them I dedicated to Dayton Ward, because in his book he had a Horda named Twalk, and so I actually created an encounter in here, and it's kind of to honor Dayton Ward's work with Corps of Engineers and stuff.
Nicely done. Yeah, we do try strategically to drop in references to the novels and the comic books and all the other secondary canon out there. So this was nicely done, Michael. I smiled when I read it, and I don't know. Did you tell Dayton about it, or I think I may have sent him a Facebook messenger. I'm not sure. I'll check. Yeah. Very nice, cool, good stuff. So yeah, chapter 2, chock full of great stuff for your games and for your players and for your game masters. So spend some time checking it out. Certainly don't feel like you need to read it, cover to cover or very closely, but there's just so much great material in there to play with and think about. So. All right, let's jump over to chapter 3. For the most part, this is Aaron. I think this is mostly your brainchild, and the mandate that I had for you was to create a complete starship building system. Like take all the notes that were in your head, because I know you've had all these notes in your head and on paper and scratch paper and stuff over the last 5 years as you've been developing all the starships for the different products. And then I said, okay, now we need to codify it, and we need to make it make sense, and we need to be able to explain it in a way that was easy for people to follow. So, given that challenge, what did you do with it?
Well, starting with the core book back when we did that, there wasn't like a codified system yet. It was more of like, hey, I want to have my base starship was the TOS Constitution, and I wanted to try to make stats that made sense, that would give like an average amount of, let's just say a 50-50 chance of a success with the starship helping you, and then sort of build both forward and backwards from that. And that being said, like in the original core book, those rules hadn't really been codified fully yet. It was more of like Aaron's gut going through it and trying to put stats down. And then when I started, I don't know, let's say 3 years ago, when I started trying to really get solid about how to build a starship, even before I pitched this book, it was more of me looking at the stats and going, okay, did I have something down in my head that I just hadn't really written down? And it turned out that the stats were very close to a system already. So that worked. Yeah, I'd have to change some of the stats, I'd have to tweak things a little bit, but it turns out that my gut was actually running formulas at that point, even before I knew it. And I started throwing things into this chapter, but like all of it isn't just math. Like Al wrote some of the stuff in here, like some of the tables and, how to make your ship meaningful. I think Al, you did that, but one of the first things in there that I wrote that wasn't really ship creation was ways to bring your ship to life, because I really do feel like you need to have your ship being a character in your game and in the TV show, and any ways that you can make your ship feel like more than just a thing in the way you describe how actions occur, or like how a special effects shot, let's say, like, hey, I'm going to describe this scene that we see on our ship. And I know in our game that Michael runs, I will often go into like, hey, we do this kind of cool sciencey thing, and then we go to the exterior of the ship and we describe how she acts, as Pioneer twists or does this, and she stumbles through space. And it's personifying the ship into a character, and you just have to get into the mindset of constantly saying she or he, depending on your language of choice, what your ship is going to act like.
I like that. I want to say when I read through that, Aaron, how you wrote it, I liked it because I think the players should hurt when the ship gets damaged. I think that they should take care in keeping with their ship, and it's almost like a slice in their own arm when a photon torpedo hits the hull. And I thought that was a really good frame if GMs really want to make the game real for people, is that you care for the ship like a person.
Yeah, and then the extension is our ship sentient on page 57, which I was like, okay, well, there's 3 different real ideas that you can go with. And if you're treating your ship like a character, maybe your ship is a character. And there's lots of ways how to integrate that into your campaign. So that's why I ended it as this book should be considered a player's guide for space frames and treat them like a main character in your show / game.
It's also like for the bulk of like the Star Trek games, the ship is one of the most critical pieces of equipment. I mean, it is like a character. And if your ship gets disabled, damaged, or God forbid, destroyed, that radically changes the tone of the mission you're on. Because if you're trying to rescue refugees and the warp core fails, you suddenly can't escape from whatever the calamitous situation is. So I thought it was a really good section to cover.
And I should probably tell like a story. When I was a kid, my parents always took me to the Star Trek movies when they got released. And I remember going to see Star Trek 3 and I was really excited. Spock's going to be back. Oh my, and I forget how old I was. But when Enterprise self-destructed, I cried as a child. I was crying because that was the ship that had all of these adventures. That was the ship that had that lady's voice in that TOS episode when it went to the one planet that had the matriarchal society. And she liked Kirk. And, as a kid, yeah, it really hurt me. And I bawled. And I remember that feeling and saying, okay, well, no, yeah, the ship is a character for sure here. That feeling that you have that after all of these adventures, after all these decades of quote unquote life, that ship has a personality. That ship has quirks to her, and Al, you wrote down that ship idiosyncrasies. Like we kind of talked with each other on that a bit. Like what can you do to make your ship a little quirky, or to show that life has happened.
Yeah, there was no better Star Trek Adventures book. I'm glad it didn't show up until Utopia Planitia, this discussion in depth at this point, because I think it just fit the book perfectly too.
And I'm sure that there's other people. I'm sorry. I'm sure that there's other people here that felt the same way with when Enterprise D, crashed on the planet. I'm absolutely positive. Or when you're watching Voyager and you saw Voyager slam into the ice planet, and you're like, oh no, or the time travel episode where Year of Hell. You're just, oh my God, what's going on? So sorry, who said something?
Aaron, I was going to say, I also noticed that there are some new mission profiles in here.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about what you added in there? It looks like maybe some stuff that could be non-Starfleet as well. Yeah,
there's non-Starfleet stuff, but not every ship in the Federation is going to be Starfleet, right? You have your legacy fleets. So you have your, the Imperial Andorian Navy. So of course there might be battle cruisers hanging out in the Andorian Navy. There might be fully pleasure ships hanging out in, the Ryzen Navy.
So you mean I could play Star Trek Love Boat?
Oh, of course. Get Captain Steubings out there. He's great.
That would be awesome.
You have your support ships, but there's also like the espionage intelligence mission profile that I was like, well, Starfleet intelligence is a thing. Everybody automatically thinks of Section 31. And I'm like, no, don't think of Section 31. Starfleet already has an intelligence agency that actually has morals, and they might have ships, so go with this espionage mission profile. Flagship. It's a bit more of umphy mission profile for admirals rather than just diplomatic and the diplomatic profile. Reserve fleet, so those ships that are almost on their way to the mothballs, but not quite. Maybe they've gone from Starfleet service back to USPA or the Vulcan High Command. They're not ready for mothballs just yet, but hey, you know what? They might be called back if the Borg make another strike. Warship, same thing as battlecruiser, just a slightly different take on it, let's say. So yeah. And then there's like the station stuff. I mean, all these creation little bits. There was a lot that went into it. A lot of back and forth. Once I had like a whole bunch of ideas, then Michael, you said something, or Al, you said something. Hey, we need to put this in. Oh yeah, you're right.
The other day, I was asked to do the station profile. Are we calling them profiles or station components? Is how we called the chapter. But I said, let me rewatch Deep Space Nine, the very first episode, and I got the quote from Jake Sisko. Why can't I live on the planet? So it says some old space station. And I was like, okay, that was a quote to start it. But I had fun. I worked with Aaron on this one where I wrote I'm going to call it the profile for the station at this point. Mm-hmm. And then he wrote how you would actually suggested talents that would go on a space station like that. But I was funny because I was rereading this after the book came out, Jim. I was cracking up, and my wife, she's like, why are you laughing? I'm like, because as I go through and read all these profiles for stations, I honestly don't remember where I pulled this out of. So I just pulled out of my butt and created all these profiles. And I think I looked into Navy tradition, like you were talking about, Jim. I think I looked into Navy tradition and the different kinds of embassies out there and things like that. And that's where it came from. But as I was reading through it, I was just cracking up. I was like, and then not only that, and then this is when I figured, I always say I'm the average Star Trek fan, but I think I went over the edge on this because not only did I write these, but I found examples in Star Trek episodes for each one of them. And then I was like,
yeah, that's great. I think it's all great. So I appreciated that you put it all in there, and that I know that Al and Aaron, I know you put a huge amount of work into pulling together all the different talents, mission profiles, weapons. Even Al, I know you spent a lot of time extrapolating Star Trek Online weapons systems into Star Trek Adventures, terminology and format to make it kind of make sense and work for us. But it was certainly intentional that we reprinted all that stuff and put it all in one book just to make it easy for game masters and players to reference it. Because me personally, when I'm playing a certain, role-playing game or other role-playing games, I hate having 30 books on the table and I'm having to flip through finding the 2 pages for each one, trying to find the references when I'm building like NPCs or characters or monsters or whatever. And so like just from a pure usability standpoint, I knew I wanted to try to bring all that stuff together into the same book. And I really appreciate the, I know, I'm sure it was a lot of cutting and pasting and digging into all the different books that we've already done to find all those different talents, all those mission profiles, all that stuff. And then to like make it all hang together to make sense. So I wanted to say, I appreciate the work that you put into it. Because honestly, if it wasn't you doing it, it would have been me, and I don't have that kind of time. So I was glad to give you the ability to do it, and then pay you for the word count and all that stuff. But I was really excited when I was reading the chapter because, reading and editing it, that you didn't just provide what we've already done, right? You added more stuff, you added more talents, you added more mission profiles. Yeah. You added all that section, like Michael added. You added all that stuff about space stations and like all the different kinds of space stations you can build. I'm curious, collectively, all of you, were you thinking beyond Starfleet when you put all this content together? Like, were you thinking about, this could be a toolkit that somebody could create some Romulan space frames or some Klingon space frames or some Packlet space frames or something? Or did you really kind of have the Starfleet lens on pretty tightly? Curious to hear that.
I did not have the Starfleet lens on very hard at all. If you look at like the system points chart right at the beginning of the creating starships section, you can see that I have there's Klingons listed there. There's Romulans listed there. Like specifically. And it's because I want to make sure that if people do just kind of randomly want to make a Klingon or a Romulan starship using these rules, that they would be comparable to the Federation / United Earth starships of the time. So they aren't like overly powered or too weak. I just wanted to make them so you could make them comparable. But yeah, I wasn't thinking specifically of the Federation.
And a lot of the new weapon types, the energy weapon types and torpedoes and whatnot, came from, Star Trek Online and specifically other species ships. You see the gravimetric stuff from the Borg and things like that. So I think that, yes, this is a Starfleet book, but we wanted the material to be able to be used across whatever frame you decide you want to run.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And one of the reasons I asked it is, obviously this book has been favorably received so far. And the natural question that has been coming up a lot is, when do we get the Adversaries book? When do we get the Klingon equivalent? When do we get the Romulan equivalent? And, I'm certainly not going to burst any bubbles here, but I just want to, remind the fandom of the realities, the ugly realities of capitalism, that 99.9% of everything that you've ever seen about Star Trek is Starfleet centric, right? I mean, DS9 may have been on a Cardassian station, but it was still a Starfleet crew in charge of it. Like, everything about Star Trek is at its heart Starfleet, and that is a very big piece of like what it is, right? And so to make a product based on Starfleet, pretty easy, right? Pretty easy sell. Just from a practical standpoint. To do something similar to this for literally everybody else, much harder, right? Much harder to justify it to the people that I need to justify products to. So what does that look like? I don't know. Like, it might be a set of PDF products. It might be nothing, right? But I think, except in specific instances, like maybe because I don't think we talked about cloaking devices too much in this book, for obvious reasons, because Starfleet doesn't use them except in very limited circumstances. Other than very specific species-specific pieces of technology, I think you could probably build any number of alien or non-Starfleet space ships, space stations, small craft, with everything that's in this book. And then maybe like pulling in some additional details from some of the other supplements that we've already done, or just making it up on your own. Certainly correct me if I'm wrong on that, but like, if you needed the overall Star Trek, ship generation kit, I think this is going to do it for you.
Honestly, like, there was another game, I forget which one it was, but it talked about how they omitted putting shuttles in the book because they said it would just take up too much space. But they said if there was an overwhelming outcry from the fans for a book called Shuttles, 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 they'll do it. And it seems like every couple of years they come back on their forums and go, well, no one wants shuttles, shuttles, shuttles.
Yeah, and it doesn't take up very much room in this book, like how to create shuttles or do that. Like, yeah, if you want to build whatever you want, it's there. You can use this. If you want to design out a species that is maybe you think in your head, oh, it's about 50 years less advanced than your typical Federation ship. Well, hey, look, there's these years with how many points you get per year. You can just go, hey, I can make a ship that's 50 years less advanced or 50 years more advanced. It's all there.
And in the end, the dice decide.
Yeah, exactly. The limit is your imagination, really.
Yeah.
One of the things that I want to make sure that people see, Jim, before we move on, this is a little hidden gem on page 77, and it talks about all the attack modifiers that can happen if you are making an attack against another ship, a smaller ship, et cetera, because these modifiers are kind of scattered throughout the core rulebook. So I tried to go through and skim that to find all these different things that can modify your rolls or your difficulty as you are firing at other ships. So I think having that all in one little place in a box is going to be very helpful for especially new players that are like, I don't understand how ship combat works.
Yeah.
Hopefully this will help.
I agree completely. I remember when I was developing the Klingon core rulebook. I remember we were developing the whole spaceships chapter for that. We were doing a top-down revision, and Aaron was working on all the space frames for the Klingons book. And I realized that you're absolutely right. It's like to get all that reference material together in the same place was really hard to do because like I was editing all the stat blocks, and it's like well, where's this? Oh, I gotta go on this page, and I gotta go to this page, and I gotta go to this page. And I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna fix this chapter so that everything is all in one relatively easy to find place. And I'm glad you did the same thing here because it just makes it so much easier to reference everything when you got all the stress effects here, you got all the rules, you got all the key stuff that you need. Now, obviously, you still need the core rule book to actually play the game and to like use this material. But like just as a useful reference, this is going to be a huge time saver for me in my games, and hopefully for other game masters and other players, it'll be a time saver too because it's just so much more convenient to have everything in like 3 pages as opposed to spread throughout a 400-page core rule book. So I appreciate you and I were on the same wavelength in that respect. So grateful for that. I think that pretty much covers chapter 3. Although I also wanted to highlight the fact that and I think Al, I think you did the bulk of the work on the talents, pulling in all the different talents from all the different ships or all the different books and putting them all together, and then creating new ones for Star Trek from the Star Trek Online. I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about that, tell us a little bit about all that research you put into Star Trek Online, and then translating the weapons and the talents, et cetera, to make it fit into STA.
Yeah, I mean, when we first learned of the project and I heard that Star Trek Online was going to be a part of it, I was pretty excited. So I've played Star Trek Online, but I prefer playing tabletop games to video games. So I had to actually do a considerable amount of research, and basically that was revolved around ship upgrades and ship abilities. And luckily, they've got an amazing community with really cool wikis out there. And I would say a lot of the stuff in Star Trek Online doesn't necessarily port over super well to the system. But I think with a few adaptations, we got a couple of cool ones into the book in general, especially some of the talents. I've seen some people talking on the Star Trek Online Discord about recognizing a couple of the talents and things like that. So, I think when you're taking a strategy game like Star Trek Online and you're doing ship battles, it's a lot easier to do when you have a 3D space to play in. Whereas, it's a bit more of an abstract system in Star Trek Adventures. Mm-hmm. If it used a map and things like that, I think a few more of the abilities could transfer over pretty well. But I think, what we got in, I think, was pretty solid. There's a talent in here where you can essentially drain your shields to give shields to a ship next to you. If for whatever reason, if they're not able to regenerate their own shields, you can give some to them. We took that from Star Trek Online. There's a self-repairing hull, which is made with backwards designed Borg nanites that basically, in Star Trek Online is like a heal spell of sorts. But we got that in here to make it work as well. So it was a lot of research. I wish that I could have gotten more in, but I think there's enough in there that people who haven't checked out the game but are fans of Star Trek Online will feel comfortable and confident that their game is being represented in the book.
Yeah, and hopefully it sparks, we've talked about this before. When you see the talents in here, don't dead end on those if you're a game master or even a player. Look at them and say, hey, you know what? I can go ahead and create a new talent now because there's enough examples in here that I get how it works with the mechanics. I know in our game, we make up talents and focuses all the time. It's just this to me just sparks the imagination. So this is definitely, to Al's point, not the end. It's just the beginning of where you can take it.
Just use it as a framework.
Yeah, and at the same time, I tried to bring in a little bit, like in my descriptors, a little bit of the lore from Star Trek Online as well. Like I do talk about the Iconian War, which is one of the big driving narratives in Star Trek Online. And hopefully we can bring some more of that to books in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say about Chapter 3 before we move on to 5 is it took me a long time to edit this chapter, and it's not because of the writing or anything, or the cutting and pasting or whatever. But what I found myself doing is because I had the starships chapter, right, the chapter 4 with all the different space frames. I found myself reading these different talents and kind of like going into the creative mindset of like, ooh, I could take this space frame and put these talents on that space frame and have this really cool ship and this really cool campaign built around this particular ship with these particular talents. It's like, oh, and what if I swap out this talent and put this talent in and change it up a little bit? Because now these are like literally building blocks, right? I mean, it's like a virtual Lego set almost, where you get your stock space frame, out of chapter 4 or whatever, whichever one you want, or make your own, because you can make your own now, of course, if you want to. And then just take, cherry pick a handful of talents, 3 or 4, whatever your ship's scale is, right? And just see what kind of weird, interesting combinations you can come up with, right? And it's just like, so I found myself stopping the edit process and going like, oh, well, if I took this talent and combined it with this talent, what kind of story possibilities does that give me, right? I mean, I didn't even care what the talent actually did, right? Like, oh, okay, so it gives me 5 points to power or gives me this benefit or whatever. So what? Just the fact that my ship has high-powered sensors, that's a story element that will influence how I tell the stories. Like, oh, this ship is state-of-the-art. It's got high-powered sensors. It can do stuff like even just beyond the mechanical aspect of it. And that's really what I wanted to encourage players and game masters to think about. Whatever your history with different RPGs is, don't look at this as just the mechanics. Like, how does this thing work in the context of the game? Like, think about the role-playing potential too of all this stuff, because these talents, like the way Nathan designed this system, it's certainly there's a mechanical element to it, but there's a gigantic piece of the narrative here too. The ship is a character, and like you're selecting their talents basically, just like you'd be selecting talents for your character, and they matter, right? They really do matter, especially because they don't swap out that frequently. I mean, certainly you can get advancements and milestones and stuff and swap them out, but like take advantage of all the plot hooks and story seeds that are built into these talents and space frames, et cetera, and lean into that, because that's really what Star Trek's all about, is a great story and characters and ships going off and doing cool stuff. So anyway, enough said about that. I'll get off my soapbox. I know you've heard it all before. So we'll head into the last chapter here. So the last chapter, Game Mastering, Chapter 5. This is 2 sub-chapters, Optional Rules, and then Mission Briefs. So I know that most of you contributed to the Optional Rules, because that was really kind of a grab bag of, I think in some cases, it might have been stuff that we just couldn't fit into the Game Master Guide or the Player's Guide, or it might have been stuff that we thought of after we had already done the Player Guide and Game Master Guide, and we said, oh, shoot, I wish we had included this, or why didn't we include that, or why didn't we include that? And we're like, oh, well, you know what? We have a Starships book coming up, so if we can, rejigger it a little bit, we still have time to fit it into that. So talk a little bit about some of the optional rules that you came up with, and what you thought as they made it into the book.
Sure. I'll start with the quote again, because I actually, if you asked me just to do quotes for all the books, I would love it. But I opened it up by God. I want everyone to notice that's God in quotations, okay? And it says, "This starship, could it carry my wisdom beyond the barrier?" I love finding quotes from Star Trek 5. That makes me super happy, because most people will not want to remember. I shouldn't say that. Many people will not remember it.
Of all the movies.
Of course, I love it. But one of the pieces I wrote for this, first of all, again, kudos on the Oberth Bridge Station on page 230. We will be using that, Jim and Al, at some point. But I did the section on jury rigging, which again, I thought was super important, because I think oftentimes players or game masters might get stuck. Like maybe there's a huge breach and engines go down. But we see happen all the time, especially with Scotty, right? He'll go grab a different system, take it apart, and rebuild it. And so I know in our game, we've done that before, where transporters have to be sacrificed in order to get the power grid back online. And so for 2 games, our characters will not be using transporters. And I thought that had to be in here as an element, so that if your ship suffers a major breach, there's still an option to get the ship up and running Scotty style. So I thought this optional rule about jury rigging, and even do you want to build a shuttle, which is a dedication to Tom Paris and the Delta Flyer, needed to be in here with rules for both of those components.
Yeah, I just want to add a little non sequitur here, that when I read the draft on jury rigging, I was so excited, because one of my absolute favorite bits from the original series is the episode The Galileo 7. When the shuttle crashes on the planet, and Scotty and Spock and McCoy and the poor red shirts that are with them, they have to figure out, how are we going to get off this ball, off this rock, right? And like, Scotty takes literally hand phasers and figures out how to jury rig those things to drain the energy out of the phasers and convert it into a power source that would power a shuttle. And I was like, of course, when I saw it the first time, I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8. And I was like, oh man, this is so cool. The engineer is amazing, because he's able to take the hand phasers and turn it into like a battery for the shuttle. How does he do that? That's so cool. And of course, it's, Scotty being Scotty, but that was the immediate very first thing that came to mind when I was reading this section is like, oh, now we can be Scotty. Like everybody can be Scotty if they want to be Scotty. Of course, you can be B'Elanna Torres or any of the other engineers too. But just that TOS moment sprang to mind fully formed, and I was like, yes, now we can do that. And it's probably completely outlandish and completely unrealistic given real world physics, but just why that just shows you what's possible, right? Like if an engineer says to the game master, oh, you know what, I've got 3 phasers, I'm going to convert the power sources in the phasers into something that I can use in the shuttle. What's the game master going to say? No, you're going to say yes. Here's your task and here's your difficulty. Go for it. Why not?
We have a character in our game played by Aaron that give him a tricorder and a phaser, and the guy can build a weapon of mass destruction. So it's like he's constantly jury rigging, and things always go wrong. So that was part of it. If anyone looks at the rule set in here, not only do you have a jury rig penalty box, but there's also now rules on, you're most likely going to have this thing blow up in your face after a couple rounds because it is jury rigged. And I think that creates a level of suspense, which is fun.
It might work for a little bit, and then my character gets set on fire, and that's
awesome.
that's okay. That's okay.
His beard goes up like every episode. I think Al did the next set of rules about maneuvering a ship. Was that right?
Yeah. So kind of like we were talking about earlier, where we wanted to collect things together in this book that we could use. That's where this idea came from. How do you move from one zone to the next? What does it mean to go to warp? Things like that are kind of scattered throughout the core rule book, and even some of the stuff from the science division book I was able to bring in here, like when talking about all these amazing stellar phenomena that Aaron makes for the books, like the severity of them and how that might impact someone who is piloting the ship. We talk about cover and asteroids / debris fields, and how difficult does that make piloting the ship, and kind of pulled that all together on a single table for quick reference. So not only can a player know what their role is going to look like to try to avoid this anomaly or these asteroids, but also a GM could look at this list and say, oh, I'm going to give them a class 3 nebula to try to navigate through, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really the point here, was to kind of collect all this stuff that's out there about navigating the ship and piloting the ship and bring it into one location, so that for easy reference.
And love it. And then I finished the chapter with diagnostics and maintenance. Again, as I'm now seeing, I have this perverse interest in making things go wrong on a ship. and I've written all that you're lacking resources, and you're salvageable, and you're jury rigging, and your diagnostics. This part was actually inspired by one of my most referenced parts of the Star Trek technical manual, which is I've always had to look up what's a level 1 diagnostic, what's a level 4 diagnostic. I always had to go back and look because I was always with my players trying to figure out how much time these things should take. So that's what inspired the downtime for maintenance roll table on 237, so that I use this with my players all the time just to slow down the game and give some pacing to the game. In addition to talking about the diagnostic modes and what they look like. And I'm really into creating, I think sometimes a GM will say, man, they're burning through my game really fast. And so there's a box on manufacturing trouble, but you don't want to tell your players you're doing that. You want to do it in a very convincing way. So as my team knows, I'm not adverse to spinning threat in very creative ways. In fact, today Aaron was playing and he had to face a level 11 difficulty challenge due to how I use threat, which made them have to go in a whole different direction. And so there's a whole box on how to do it and make it believable. Again, these are all tools for GMs so that players don't feel like you're cheating. You're actually using the system. So there's some optional rules you can drag in for that.
Yeah. I'll just throw in a shameless plug for the command source book. Not that I'm trying to sell anybody on it, but I included brief descriptions of each of the diagnostic levels in that. But if you don't want to look at that book, I would encourage you to go straight to the source and get yourself a copy of the Next Generation Technical Manual. If you don't have it already, I'm willing to bet it's on everybody's shelf, at least on this call. But if you're a fan and you're curious about the inner workings of a starship, man, you can't get a better resource than that. Like I love Utopia Planitia, but like Rick Sternbach, Michael Kuda collaborated on that tech manual. It's still in print. It's been in print for 30 years now, and there's a reason for it because it's really good. It's a really good reference. So go find it. I'm on my second copy because the first one got so dog-eared and worn out that the pages fell apart. I still got the pages stacked up on the shelf, but I had to get a new copy that was bound up a little bit better. So yeah, it's great to have this extra context. And right before we go to talk about the mission briefs, Michael, I just want to say that this book, in addition to all the space frames, right? It's just all these extra rules, all these extra options, all these extra tools for you to drop into your toolbox as a game master and as a player. Even like if you think about like the Shackleton book, there was a whole chapter in the Shackleton book about spatial anomalies, spatial weird things going on, things that you can drop into your game to make it more, dynamic. And just like you start combining all these different tools spread across the whole line, you've got just a wealth of material here to play with. I mean, we could literally pull the plug on this game tomorrow, and you've got enough material to last you decades. And not that we're going to do that, trust me. And I don't want to scare anybody. we got plenty of runway ahead of us yet. But anyway, so yeah, take advantage of all the rules. And I guess I'm really aiming this at the new players to the line who aren't that familiar with it and who might be listening to this. There's just so much cool stuff out there to play with. Any book you pick up, you're going to find something worth using. But all that being said, let's wrap it up here, Michael, and talk about the mission briefs. I'll be the first to admit, setting this up, that as we were going through the manuscript and I was doing my job as project manager and editor, kind of evaluating like all the great content we had, like where's my page count? How's that going to fit my budget? Can I afford to print all of this? Do I have to cut back, etc.? There was a thought process that went through my mind a couple of times where I thought I would need to cut some pages and be strategic. We had to cut a couple space frames, mostly because we didn't have the rights to do them, which is okay. Aaron overwrote, which is A-okay because Aaron always overwrites, but I'm okay with that because he just gives me a wealth of options to work with. But the mission briefs would have been the first easy place to cut because we do the free mission brief packs, and I knew this content would never get lost. We would just release it as a separate product. But I made the budget work, and I was able to include them, and I'm glad I included them because it's just that much. It's that many more tools that you can use and play with. So, Michael, why don't you? I know you wrote all these, so why don't you just tell us a little bit about this new set of mission briefs here in Utopia Planitia?
Sure. And I just want everyone to know too, if you don't hear from John, it's because he was having power troubles. He texted us and I think his power went out finally. So thank you to John, in case you watch this back, for joining us. Hopefully you get back on before the end of this taping. I want to say, when you asked me originally, Jim, to do these mission briefs, I assumed they were going to be one of those free packs. So the title of it was "She'll Always Bring You Home," which was one of Admiral McCoy's lines in the first TNG. He was passing over the handle to Data, basically, And so I was happy you kept the quote, "You treat her like a lady, she'll always bring you home," in here. Because really it goes back to what Al was talking about earlier, and Aaron, when we were talking about sentience. I said, I need to create 10 briefs that make people appreciate the ship. And I wanted it to be that you could play 10 in a row, though, and it would feel like an episodic TV show. So I really dug deep on this one. In fact, I can't go into details about them because Aaron and Al are playing through them right now. And I forbid them from reading this section along with all my players. I said, do not read this section. Yeah. But they're in the middle of one right now. So in fact, let me ask them right now. They're in the middle of one right now. They're about in Act 2 of our thing. How is it giving you a view of the ship in a different way?
I think it's making the ship feel claustrophobic in one way. I think it's an interesting way of making the ship, because normally when you're in the ship, it's like there's all these possibilities. We can go anywhere, we can do anything. But right now it's kind of like, no, we're not. We can't go anywhere, and the ship is closing in around us.
Yeah, I think Aaron, you hit the nail on the head right there. Is that like essentially we have entire floors of the ship that we can't access, we can't travel through, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that I've been looking at a lot of our Intrepid diagrams to see what the floors look like, where things are, it's really like, to one point, like we talked about, walking on the outside of the hull to get to one section of the ship, things like that. So like, it's really giving you an appreciation of just more the layout and the design of the ship that you're in. And I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, we've done our EVAs and trying to describe how even in Star Trek, moving in space can be dangerous and you should use tethers and you don't make sudden movements. Otherwise you throw yourself around and it's not a good idea.
So this makes me happy to hear, because that is exactly what I wanted with the end of the 10 mission briefs. I wanted people to have the ship be tangible. I want them to understand how important, say, Deck 5 on an Intrepid is when you have the medical bay, or Deck 7 and 8, which are the cargo bay. I wanted people to be able to basically deconstruct their ship. And so, in 10 months, when we get through all 10 mission briefs, by the time I think this crew is going to be like, whoa, we know our ship like the back of our hand. We know all of its components. So I designed it really to celebrate all the components and workings of these Starfleet vessels. So if you're playing the Utopia Planitia book and you're picking your ship for the first time and you play through these mission briefs, you're going to be doing what Al did, and you're going to be pulling out those schematics. And I hope I'm glad they're playing through the first one right now, and they're getting that.
I can honestly say that I've taken turbo lifts for granted up until this episode. So, it's when you can't use a turbo lift to get from one place to another, it's intriguing. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it calls back to Star Trek V, where they didn't have the turbo lift, so they were literally climbing up the ladders, right, up and down ladders, and that's a whole different skill set of challenges, right? So you're not relying on your reason or your intellect. You're all about fitness, and do you have the strength to climb up 30 decks or 20 decks or whatever it is, right?
And I seem to remember at least one episode last season, Michael, where a tubby Tellarite had to climb up multiple decks worth of Jeffrey's tubes up and down because the turbo lifts weren't working too.
Oh, and imagine if you take out Jeffrey tubes and transporters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that's the mission briefs. Is I challenge those ship systems, I challenge the schematics, and I challenge how in love people are with their ship. And so let's hope that they meet the goals. And people, of course, write us your play reports and continuing missions. We'd love to hear how these turn out, especially when everyone plays them differently. So that was the goal of that, Jim.
Yeah. And then just my last word on the mission briefs here. For those of you who've been following along with the life of the line, we brought in mission briefs in the Klingon core book, and every mission brief is effectively a standalone episode. Yeah, you can add, modify, change to, of course, but each one was written to be intended to be a single episode. And with the release of the last mission brief pack in July, and then Utopia Planitia here in August, these mission briefs bring us to over 200 discrete episodes / standalone adventures in Star Trek Adventures. So if you're new to the game line, in 5 years, we've produced more episodes than any of the Star Trek series, right? So like Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, they had like 178, 179 episodes apiece. We're well over 200 at this point. And now, you might want to say that's a cheat a little bit because the mission briefs are only one page, but you know what? It's a complete story on one page. And I didn't really appreciate it until I saw your updated list on continuing mission of all the different missions that are available now for Star Trek Adventures, not just the full-length standalone adventures in all the different products and by themselves, but also the mission briefs, because we're packing 10 of these into a pack, right? And it's just. And
I want to remind people too, because there's so many, and we've talked about it before, I now play 2 mission briefs at a time. So right now we're actually playing one from Tony Pye's station-based games while playing one from Utopia Planitia as our B story. So because I want to play everything, I have no choice now but just to combine as many as possible to get through them all. So it's really fun.
Or you just need to start running another game and have 2 games going concurrently, and then you can cover everything.
If I retire early, if anyone would like to, if about 20 people want to supplement my annual income, I'll be more than happy to.
Well, point out. So you can do that. You can do that with get yourself a Patreon or something. And
I don't know. I'm in the Bay. I'm in the Bay Area, so that's quite a income to set.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
If I move to North Carolina, it's done.
There you go. Aaron, apologies.
No. I'm sorry for trying to. I wanted to point out 2 pieces of art. I love the art in this section. Like,
sure.
Like the first one's 232 because that's one of from my drawing deeply from the well adventure. I saw that and I'm like, God, I still love that piece of art because I had sketched out those critters at one point and sent it in, and somebody actually like realized that those creatures, and my original drawing was so doofy, and that just looks beautiful.
Great.
And then the one on the next page, it is so full of Easter eggs that I am 233.
Oh, 233.
The Hermes.
Yeah, that is so full of Easter eggs that people that that love Hermes class should actually recognize a lot of the text that's at the bottom.
Andorian's Shipyard. What's FJSPH?
Jim, can I say?
I don't see why you couldn't. I mean, it's not. It's
Franz Joseph.
Yep.
Franz Joseph, Project Saladin.
Yep. From the old, I don't have it handy. It's on my shelf. The old Starfleet technical manual, the big paperback that came out. Gosh, was that late 70s, early 80s?
Yeah.
Classic.
I have like 4 different versions of that on my shelf.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Very nice. I love Easter eggs like that.
And
we'll appreciate that.
Yeah, it's just so. I mean, we dropped a lot of Easter eggs this year. Like I don't know if the fans are going to find them all, but it's always fun to when they post on some random message board. Hey, did you see page 47 of this? It's like, oh yeah, you found it finally. Someone found it. Of course, there's so many Easter eggs in these books that like I've forgotten a bunch of them, and like because I told you I have such a short memory for these books. I'll go flipping through a book and I'm like, what is that? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Anyway, so that is Utopia Planitia, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 5. That is a deep dive into those 4 chapters. Next time, we'll be talking about chapter 4 in more detail with certainly Aaron and Michael and myself. Al, you're certainly going to be part of that if you want to be part of it. I don't know. I think we'll get Thomas back as well. I think Thomas Maroney will be on board too. As well. Yeah, because we're going to be talking about all those different space frames that we were able to cram into here. So,
all right, let's
wrap it up here. So, Al, Aaron. As a tradition here on Continuing Mission, we like to say thank yous to either game stores or anything appropriate. So, Al, who would you like to thank this time around?
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to Jetpack Comics and Games up here in New Hampshire. We're currently putting together what we call Spocktoberfest, and we're going to be doing some STA stuff towards the end of October. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Man, I got to visit you sometime. That'd be fun.
Very cool. Aaron.
I'll shout out my long-suffering wife who has put up with my Star Trek obsession and kind of shares in it in some regards. So, thank you, Darlene.
Well, I can't be one up by that. So I'm going to have to thank my wife, who yesterday started watching Deep Space Nine.
Woo-hoo!
I've never seen it. So she sat down, watched the first episode. Quite happy tonight when this is done, we move on to episode 2. So I'm so happy to hear about that.
I'm so proud to have like a Star Trek fan for a wife, because we were watching Lower Decks, the last episode of Lower Decks, which was the first episode of season 3. Yeah. And we both were cheering with Zephyr Cochrane launching in the Phoenix. We were just, yes.
It was
Magic carpet ride.
Oh, and John, good. Go ahead, Michael. Oh, I was saying, so John, you're coming in. We're just doing our thank yous. I already thanked you anyways, just when you fell off, but we'll get your thank yous. I have to give it a thank out to the fans real quick. Viking Hobby in Sacramento, Earl Wynn Rubsum, and then Troy, one of our players, Captain Jalil. He wanted to shoot out Voss Media Board Game Cafe near Kalamazoo, Michigan. Mm-hmm. Michigan, right? Yeah, Michigan there. And then lastly, GMO Ward Game HQ in Oklahoma City, who's owned by Ron Palminteri, Brian Doherty, Darren Minard, and Michael Kirk. Is that not a cool name?
Perfect.
All right, John, who's your shout outs to? And then Jim, we'll let you wrap it up.
I think my shout outs to this wonderful storm we've got outside. I think right now my shout outs are just to Jim for always being there to let me talk to him and for me to shoot ideas off of, to my fellow writers, because everybody did a great job. I mean, to say that this is a collaborative effort, really, underscores just how much we bounce things off each other, and being able to toss the ball to someone and be like, hey, I've got this idea, but I'm not sure it's really good. And being able to hear people say, give good advice, point out what's wrong with it, point out what's great about it. And also just big shout out to the fans. I mean, if you ever go on Twitch and you just look for Star Trek games and you see such raw enthusiasm, and really you were the ones that let us know like what we're doing right. And you guys let us know how much you love our stuff, and can't thank you enough for it.
Hard to pass that up, or hard to pick up after that. But that was a great send off. Everything you said, I would have said anyway. I always try to thank the fans for being such gracious fans, being so supportive of each other, especially because I see it all the time on all the different social medias that new people come into the game and they're curious, they're asking questions, and constantly there's always a stream of fans of the game who are giving suggestions, giving advice, helping out. Providing reviews, providing input on stuff to go think about. So always a shout out to the fans. Can't thank you enough. And then, just selfishly, I'll say thank you to the writers, not on just this book, but all the Star Trek Adventures books. This one was interesting though, because this was one of the more collaborative books that we've done in terms of, I had an outline as we were going into the development of it, but I really left it open-ended and said, look, what other ideas do you have? How do we make this even better? How do we make it a more comprehensive toolkit? And you all had great ideas. We found places to fit them, and everybody, grabbed assignments when they could and started writing, and somehow it all came together. And as it does sometimes, it didn't turn into just a big pile of hash, right? It actually all worked, and it's all together. So big gracious thank you to all the writers. And I wouldn't be doing my job as an acquisitions editor to also note. If you're paying attention to this video in particular, but some of the other ones too, like there's tidbits in here that you can pull out. If you want to write for Star Trek Adventures, certainly reach out to me. But like use these folks as examples. Look what they've done. They've made themselves subject matter experts on their content. Aaron's the science, technology, spaceship guy. Al took it upon himself to go research Star Trek Online and translated that knowledge into stuff that we can use in the game. So like make yourself smarter about Star Trek, like if you're passionate about it, because like all these folks are passionate about it. Everybody I go call out to over and over again to work on the game, they're passionate about Star Trek and the game, and that's what we need. Like we don't just need somebody to write 10,000 words because it's a job. Like that's not fun. Like who wants to do that, right? Do it because you love it, and I'll get you into the book somehow or into a product somehow. So please reach out to me. Anyway, that being said, we are done. So next time we'll be talking about Chapter 4, all about the different space frames that are in this book. So I hope you've had a great time. Michael, get us out of here. Sign us out.
All right, everyone, IDIC, peace out. Love y'all.
Live long and prosper. Be safe, be well. We'll see you next time.